In the trading city of Novgorod, on the shore of Lake Ilmen, there lived a young gusly player named Sadko, who owned nothing worth counting. No wife, no house of his own, no guild would take him. Every evening he sat at the water's edge and played anyway, because the music was the only wealth he had. The merchants of Novgorod walked past him without looking. The lake did not. One still evening, the water began to move without wind, slow rings circling outward from nothing at all. Sadko kept playing because he didn't yet know that something ancient and enormous was rising beneath his own reflection to listen. When the Tsar of the sea finally broke the surface, dripping and delighted, he hadn't come to punish the boy for disturbing his kingdom. No mortal had ever played anything so beautiful down in his deep halls, he said, and he wanted to hear more of it. He didn't come to punish Sadko. He came to make him rich beyond counting. In exchange for one thing Sadko wouldn't understand, he'd agreed to give until years later in the middle of the open sea, with his own ships going nowhere and his own sailors drawing lots to decide which of them the water was going to keep. The Sea Tsar told Sadko a secret. Tomorrow, the merchants of Novgorod would gather at the lake to fish, and one fish among all the silver ones would have fins of pure gold. "Wager everything you can borrow," the Tsar said, "that you alone can catch it." Sadko had nothing to lose that anyone would miss, so he wagered his freedom against a shop full of goods if he failed. And the next morning, in front of the whole merchant guild that had never once let him through their door, he pulled a fish with fins of solid gold out of the water with his bare hands. The guild paid the wager in stunned silence. Sadko took the gold not as a lucky win, but as a foundation, and built on it the way only a man who has been poor his whole life knows how to build, carefully, relentlessly, without ever quite believing it wouldn't be taken away. Within a few years, he owned more ships than any merchant in Novgorod, sailing goods from the Baltic to the Caspian, his name spoken in the same breath as the city's oldest trading families. He remembered, in a distant way, that a stranger from the lake had started all of it. He did not think of it as a debt. The Sea Tsar had not forgotten it was one. 12 years into his fortune, Sadko loaded his finest fleet with silk, furs, and silver and set sail across the open sea to trade in distant ports. 30 ships strong, each one flying his own house colors. The wind was good. The water was calm. And then, without warning, in the middle of open ocean with no land in any direction, every ship in the fleet simply stopped, sails full, rudders straight, and not moving an inch, as if the sea itself had closed a fist around every keel at once. The crews tried everything. They threw cargo overboard to lighten the ships. They rowed until their arms gave out. Nothing moved them so much as a length of rope. Sadko, standing at the prow of his lead ship, watching his entire fortune go dead in the water, finally understood what every sailor on every deck around him was already whispering. Somewhere out here, something was owed, and it hadn't been paid. "The Tsar of the Sea has had gifts from every one of us for 12 years, the oldest captain said. "Gold thrown overboard, offerings poured into the water before every voyage. Except you, Sadko. You've never once paid him anything, in 12 years of the fortune he handed you." They cast lots to see who the sea actually wanted. Every man's chip floated. Sadko's sank straight to the bottom. There was no arguing with a sinking chip. Sadko took his gusli, said goodbye to men who wouldn't meet his eyes, and was lowered over the side on a plank of oak. And the moment the water closed over his head, the plank kept sinking, down and down through cold and dark and pressure that should have killed him twice over, until it set him gently on the floor of a palace no living man had ever seen and lived to describe. The Tsar of the Sea sat on a throne of coral and drowned ship's timber, delighted all over again to see him. 12 years hadn't dimmed his memory of that music by the lake at all. He had a wedding to celebrate, he said. One of his own daughters was to be married, and no one in his entire kingdom could play the way this small, poor, mortal man once had. Sadko understood. Watching hundreds of years of sunk gold and drowned sailors glittering in the palace walls around him, that he had not been brought down here to pay a debt. He had been brought down here to stay. He played anyway, because refusing wasn't a choice the Tsar had offered him, and because some part of him still remembered that this was the one thing he had always been good at. The Tsar rose from his throne and began to dance, and above them, on the surface no one down here could see, that same dancing tore the ocean into a storm that started splitting ships in half. Sadko played faster, and the Tsar danced harder, and far above the waves grew tall enough to drown sailors who had done nothing wrong except be caught on the water while a king's feet moved. In his palace under everyone's ships, playing music he could not stop. Sadko had no way of knowing what his own gusli strings were doing to the world above him, until an old man appeared beside him in the crowd of the wedding feast, gray-bearded, plain-dressed, entirely out of place among the coral and the drowned gold, and told him quietly what had to happen next. "Break your strings," the old man said. "It's the only way to stop his feet. And when the dancing ends and he offers you a bride from among his daughters, do not choose the beautiful ones paraded in front of you first. Choose the plainest girl at the very end of the line, and when you're married, do not kiss her, not once. Do exactly this, and you'll see Novgorod again." Sadko snapped every string on the gusli with his bare hands, and the Tsar's feet finally stilled, and the storm above them broke. When the offer of a bride came, he looked past the loveliest daughters in the kingdom and chose the last, plainest one in the line, a girl named Chernava, exactly as he'd been told, and let the wedding feast carry him toward a night he already knew he had to survive without a single kiss. Sadko lay down beside his new bride and did not kiss her, and held himself awake against 12 years of exhaustion and a wedding feast built to make him forget the one instruction that mattered. And sometime before dawn, without ever quite remembering falling asleep, he woke up alone on solid ground, blinking in real sunlight, the Volkhov River running past him exactly where it always had. Novgorod's rooftops visible in the distance precisely as he'd left them. His fleet was waiting in the harbor, every ship intact, every hold still full of the cargo that had left port with him, as if no time at all had passed on the surface for however long he had lived and nearly stayed at the bottom of the sea. He built a church on the riverbank that same year, in thanks to the plain-dressed old man who had told him how to come home, and by every account that survives him, Sadko, the merchant of Novgorod, never once played his gusli on open water again. The story was carried by singers of the old Novgorod bailainas for centuries after. One of the only heroic epics from that whole tradition, where the hero wins not with a sword, but by knowing exactly when to stop playing.